Well, good morning. Today is Monday, June the 1st. And today we're going to be reading from 1 Timothy chapter 5, verses 1 through 8. And here, Paul's instructing Timothy on how we are to treat each other within the body of Christ, within the church. He says here, "Do not rebuke an older man, but exhort him as a father, younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters, with all purity. Honor widows who are really widows. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show piety at home and to repay their parents. For this is good and acceptable before God. Now she who is really a widow and left alone, trusts in God and continues in supplications and prayers night and day. But she who lives in pleasure is dead while she lives." Let me read that again, just for clarity. Now she who is really a widow and left alone trusts in God and continues in supplication and prayers night and day. But she who lives in pleasure is dead while she lives. And these things command, that they may be blameless. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. What is the theme here? What is Paul addressing? He's talking about things that really are just common Christian teaching. Show respect. Respect your elders. That's a saying that has been used for generations. And it's grounded here in Scripture. Show respect for those who are older. Don't rebuke an older man, but exhort him as a father. You know, parents aren't perfect. I know I'm not. And now, my kids are grown, and they do show me tons of respect. But if I'm wrong about something, they wouldn't hesitate to tell me that I'm wrong, but they would do it respectfully. They would speak to me as their father. And I think, hopefully by the time you get my age, you realize, yeah, you do make mistakes, and you're not always right. The older we get, I've said before, the more education I received, and the more I learned, the more I realized what I didn't know. And that is that, no one has all the answers, save God. And we make mistakes. But we can only go off the information we have as well, And with all the different opinions and different things that are out there, you really need discernment. And, that's something that also comes with age. And so show respect to those who are older, both men and women. He says, treat older men and older women as father and mother, and younger men as brothers, and younger women as sisters, with all purity. Exhort. He uses the word exhort. That's encouragement. If you exhort somebody, you're encouraging them. You're encouraging them to do the right things. You're encouraging them to along a certain path. And he's talking to Timothy, who's a young preacher, okay? And so a young pastor, or a younger pastor even, needs to know how to approach people of all ages. Okay? I mean, when I first started as a pastor, I was in my late 30s. And I was in the congregation I pastored was older. I mean, for the time I pastored there, most of the time, my wife and I were the youngest parents, and we had a daughter who was a teenager. I mean, our girls were, there just weren't a lot of people in our church that had children anymore. Their children were grown, and it was a difficult thing. You know, a healthy church has to have children, and when the pastor's kids are some of the only kids, that's not a healthy church. And unfortunately, that's the case in many places. How do we reach a younger generation? Well, you have to be able to do that. And sometimes that means that the older generation needs to change some things. I'm a traditionalist. I like tradition. But I'm not married to tradition. And let me put that in context of the local church where Timothy would have been pastoring. I love old hymns. But I will tell you this. I don't like old hymns when they're played slowly and you turn the so-called worship service into a funeral dirge. That can't happen. There's a way to sing hymns in an up-tempo, uplifting, lively way, and they should be. Well, some obviously are reflective, and there's a place for that, but there's also a time for uplifting and celebration and worship of God. You know, when I think of David coming back from his victory, he was dancing before the Lord. Now, you can't dance to something that sounds like a funeral dirge. So that tells me something about the music. And you just list the musical instruments: the tambourine, the lyre, which was that would have been the equivalent of a guitar in that day. You know, flutes and wind instruments. I mean, it was a fun thing. They had drums and tambourines and cymbals and I know there's a generation. I grew up in a church that was very much low key in their style of worship. But I do believe also that everything needs to be done in an orderly fashion and in good taste. So I don't think we need to swing the pendulum clear to the other side, abandon hymns, and go totally contemporary and sing 7-11 songs, 7 words 11 times, repetitive, tap your foot stuff, but about an inch, about deep theologically or doctrinally. And so there needs to be a balance. And so sometimes you need to approach the older people in the church and encourage them to loosen up. Enjoy worship. Enjoy the young people coming to church. I'll never forget the first church I served as a youth pastor. We built a new education wing, and the downstairs of it was a large room, and we had Awana. And I remember after we did the ribbon cutting and started having meetings in there, some people complained because the kids left some marks on the wall. Instead of complaining, they should have praised the Lord that there's a mark on the wall left by a child, because that means there was a child in church. This perspective. And Timothy needs to know how to approach people and encourage them in the right way. Okay, then he talks about widows. And he says, if a widow, and there were classifications of widows. There were widows who had family, okay, children and grandchildren, who could care for them, and they should do so. But then there were widows indeed who had no family, no one to take care of them, and the church should take care of them. But the caveat was this. He says in verse 6, but she who lives in pleasure is dead while she lives. In other words, if she's a widow indeed and she's using her singleness to live it up in the world, then there's no obligation for the church to care and support someone like that. And then he makes this statement, verse 8. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an infidel, an unbeliever. He's talking about he's talking about laziness. He's talking about someone who does not take care of his family, refuses to work. A deadbeat, we would call somebody like that. That's inexcusable. If you are a child of God, who depends on the Lord and looks to the Lord and has faith in God to provide, then you need to do everything you can to take care of your family. Now, obviously, if someone's disabled, if someone is being persecuted because of their faith and they lose their job, and that had happened a lot to many Jewish believers in the early church, then it's not necessarily a lack of effort, right? So that's something that would have been taken into consideration. But what he's basically just saying is there's a way that you need to interact with people in the church. Older people, men and women, you need to encourage them and talk to them like you would a parent. Younger men, younger women, you need to address them like a brother or a sister in all purity. Widows, you need to honor them, and those who are in the church. If your grandmother or mother is a widow, then you have a responsibility to repay their parents, is what he says. Show piety at home and to repay their parents, for this is good and acceptable before God. And there's a point. I know, and I've been asked on occasion for advice in these kinds of matters. When you have an elderly parent who is in declining health and is able to function at home without totally upending the family, then you should take care of them. But when their health gets such, or where it's causing serious issues, what do you do? I know families who have struggled with the decision to put mom or dad in a nursing home, and I know people who have strong opinions and convictions on both sides of the issue because they've had a bad experience with a nursing home. I have been to visit many people in the nursing home, and I've even taken my children to visit people in the nursing home. And what do you do when you go in the nursing home and there are people there begging your children to take them home, and it scares your kids half to death? And it's sad because a lot of those people in nursing home, they're put in there and they're forgotten about, and that's a travesty. That's a shame. And children that do that to their parents ought to be ashamed of themselves. But when someone's mind is gone and they don't even know who their children are or their grandkids, and sometimes they can turn violent, then the choices become, it's very difficult. You have to take, as a parent, you have to protect your children. You have to protect your marriage. So it's not always cut and dry. I wish everything was just straightforward and simple, but it's often not. And you just have to be prayerful and discerning and follow the Lord. Seek counseling. But honor your mother, your father. And that's what Paul is talking about here. And he's giving advice again to a young pastor, Timothy, who's dealing with people of all ages in his church. That's all I have for today. I hope you have a wonderful day and a great week, and we will see you again tomorrow.